looked really good, with an expectation that there might be well over 20 million jobs in this area by 2030. So large numbers of green jobs have been created. If you take a range of sectors in France, for example, in a very short period of time, in housing efficiency, in renewable energy, in cleaner transport, France has created a 30 billion euro industry employing over 200,000 people directly in the sector, and these jobs are more than the direct employment in the French car industry today. Germany is basically on track for the environmental industry overtaking machine manufacturing and the car industry in the next 10 or 15 years. What is often overlooked is that green jobs come in several forms, and the employment effect is much larger than what immediately meets the eye. There are direct employment effects, people who set up the windmills and who improve the insulation of a house, but there are strong indirect and induced job effects. Indirect in the supply chain, and many of those jobs are perfectly traditional jobs in manufacturing, in transport, and in logistics, etc. And there are induced effects, which are very important, because any expenditure on energy has the lowest possible employment effect that you can have. Energy is an extremely capital-intensive and very employment-extensive sector. If you buy anything else but energy, electricity or petroleum or gas, you're creating more jobs. So energy efficiency and renewable energy have a strong effect of induced job creation. These mean that there's also a fairly wide geographic spread to the areas that benefit from the creation of those jobs, and across sectors, occupations and skills levels. Green jobs are not only the parish of intellectuals, of highly skilled, academically trained technicians. There are as many, even more, jobs for blue-collar jobs, or green-collar jobs, as they call them in the United States now, and manufacturing jobs with lower skill levels, and for a broad section of the workforce at a different level of preparation. By way of example, here is a map of the renewable energy industry and how it spreads across Germany. And this came as a surprise to many to see that, yes, this industry is taking hold everywhere if you do not count only the direct employment but also the supply chains that feed this industry. Now, yes, there are challenges. I like the notion of win, no lose. One is job quality, and we know that there are problems. Yesterday, the discussion alluded to some of the low-quality jobs that are labeled green. There is no strong lobby for equity within countries. We need pro-poor green growth, and it is possible, we think, if we can muster the will and the political support for it. And there are job substitution and losses. Some of the green jobs simply replace brown jobs, so it's not all gain. There is some loss associated with this. There are mine workers, and there will in due course be people in the car industry who are looking at losing their current source of income. So we need to deal with this, and we need just transitions for these groups who are affected by the measures that are taken to avoid some of the worst environmental impacts. And we need a fair transition for those who are suffering from the climate change that is already taking place, even though they have not contributed at all to generating it. Just quickly to address the question of quality. Yes, there are awful scenes. There are some 10 million people in China alone who work in the recycling sector, but it's often awful employment. And we wouldn't call those green jobs. But it's a very effective way to reduce the impact of heavy industries who have exhausted their technological options otherwise. It has massive employment potential, and we can avoid this 3D phenomenon of dirty, difficult, and dangerous jobs with low incomes. For example, Brazil has invested in upgrading its recycling sector, and there are good examples for what can be done if you want to do it right. Talking about enhancing the degrees of freedom for the excluded, as Professor Van Parijs did, 1.6 billion people today, in spite of rising emission levels and phenomenal amounts of energy consumed in the world, have no access to modern energy at all. But the example of the Grameen Bank in Bangladesh shows that this energy can be taken to the poorest of the poor. These people buy photovoltaic cells for their homes through a small credit scheme. These are not donations, they're not gifts, and they totally change these people's lives in terms of their educational possibilities, in terms of their income generating possibilities. Grameen is taking this to 100,000 houses in Bangladesh now, but this, like many other schemes, really lacks scale. It is a drop in the ocean of what is needed. Similarly, yesterday there was discussion about social housing and how people are suffering from a rising energy cost. But here you have a scheme in South Africa that actually improves the quality of social housing by integrating renewable energy and good insulation into this scheme. It helps the South African government to avoid the power outages that the whole country suffers from. It improves the quality of life of the dwellers in these housing schemes. They save on their energy bills, and you can do it in ways that generates employment for the people in those communities themselves. The workers on these roofs live in the communities. Talking about just transition adaptation, Haiti is a country that has emissions that are not